thank you for this. I appreciate you doing another interview for your fan page on Facebook.
My great pleasure to do it.
It has been 2 years since we did the last one, and since that time, your fan base on that page has almost doubled.
A mystery to me.
Well, it could be to you, but there's a lot of people that still love that show. It is still regarded as the epitome of fishing shows to ever come across. And there's still a lot of people that just love hearing you talk.
I'm very grateful for that.
So when you agreed to do this again, I reached out to them. They sent me some questions they kind of wanted to know. Some of them are some personal relationship type questions with guests you had and people you knew. Some of them are show related. A lot of tackle related questions. So I thought we'd start with the show related since it's based on the show. And one of the questions, which I've had to do myself trying to do videos and stuff like that, is the music selection process. Because one of the great things about Walker's Cay was how well the music went with whatever scenario you were fishing. Whether it was a mountain creek somewhere, or the flats, or the blue water chasing sailfish off Costa Rica, whatever. The music was always perfect. So what was your process in that?
Well, it was no accident. Fortunately, I've got a very, very talented brother and cousin. And my cousin and my brother did the music for Walkers. And it was tailored for all of these situations, so that the music wasn't purchased somewhere, as it is now, pretty much. We had the budget to do that, and we also had the creative license and liberty to do pretty much whatever we wanted. The sponsors at that time in television shows didn't have all the power that they have now, and so we were pretty much able to do whatever we wanted. And my brother and cousin were all about doing it. They were really into it and did a great job.
Yeah, they probably, I mean, if they wrote every one of those musical pieces, I'll put them up there with a lot of other music geniuses out here.
They are geniuses. Both of them are.
So, is that music still, is your brother still doing music? Is it?
My brother and my cousin are still doing music. My cousin is the touring guitar player for Reba McEntire, so he travels all over with her, and he does a lot of studio work as well in Nashville. My brother is still writing music and performing, and got another cousin who's the lead singer for Sister Hazel, another popular band that's out there and around these days. So lucky to have all these talented musicians in the family, and they were eager to help and did a hell of a job.
They really did. So, yeah, because, I mean, today you're buying canned music, typically.
Yeah.
And it gets hard. I don't think people realize how hard trying to get that music matched up
It is.
It is, and how much money you have to spend on it nowadays, which, the artist got to get paid.
They do.
I know I'm about as musically talented as a dying fish. So,
Yeah, I'm with you.
Is there anybody in the 16 years of Walker's Cay, or even the shows you did prior to that, anybody you didn't get to fish with that you wish you had?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are a lot of people that I wish I had gotten to fish with. And fortunately for me, most of them were people that I knew and had a relationship with, but just for one reason or another, having to do with scheduling or health or whatever the situation might have been, there were people that I didn't get to actually film with. And one of the ones, I think probably the major one that I regret never having been able to actually film with was Joan Wolfe. Although she's a friend and has been for a long time, and I had a major crush on Joan. Don't tell her. For years, in the '60s, but I don't want her to know that.
We'll edit that part out.
Yeah, edit that out. But we could never get our schedules together. And that was always something that I regretted. But for the most part, most of the other people that I wanted to do something with, I was fortunately able to.
And Joan just recently kind of retired from the casting world as far as instructing people and that whole realm.
Yeah, she's taking it easy. She's taking it easy. She's into her 90s at this point, and she's chilling out.
Finally.
Yeah.
Well deserved.
Yeah, but I had a wonderful trip with Joan not too long ago down to the Bahamas. We had sort of a get-together at Blackfly, and we all got to fish together for a few days. I remember that Joan was there, and Chico was there, and Stu App was there, and Pat Ford was there, and I mean and Vaughn Cochran was there, and we had the greatest few days there together, all catching up and telling stories about the old days and everything. So, but yeah, I got to hang with some characters.
Yeah, quite a few there. So we've discussed this before, and we've talked about the difficulty with it. I have pushed and prodded and tried to find ways to push and prod you for a new show. But they want to know, do you have any plans for a new show?
I don't. The short reason is that today the time-buy model for network television or cable television is so restrictive creatively that I just choose not to do it. And I alluded to this a little earlier, but back when we were doing Walkers, there were 2 saltwater fishing shows during the entire 15 years that Walkers was on the air, and that was the Walker Show and Mark Sosin had a show. There wasn't anything else in saltwater during almost that entire time. So the competition for sponsorship was almost non-existent. I mean, if you wanted a truck sponsor, and the truck sponsor wanted to have a presence in outdoor television, saltwater fishing, there were only 2 shows to choose from. So you had complete creative control over what the content of the show was. You could control the show from not becoming an infomercial and showing products every 2 seconds and sticking products in people's faces. And that happens because the sponsors insist on having so much airtime for their product. But back then, it wasn't the case because there was no competition for sponsorship. So we were able to focus on things like relationships and the interesting things about varying fishing destinations that they don't have time to do today because they have to feature these products so much. So it's not something that I'm interested in doing. Pretty much sticking with YouTube things.
Well, and I think that's where a good push for your type of material you like to produce is.
Yeah.
You know, you can put out a product. Yes, it may not be a 23-minute, 4-day show that's, you know, professionally edited and put together, but you get to focus on what you want to focus on.
Yeah. You know, I'm having a lot of fun with Brian Fleshing doing a lot of those things for Mad River right now. They're a lot of fun to do, and there's humor involved, and
Yep.
there's also meaningful content, real meaningful content. You know, I don't have to promote anything that I don't choose to promote.
And that's important.
It is.
Because if you look at a lot of these shows, like you talk about, you know, I get asked all the time, what fishing shows do you watch? I don't watch any of them. Not anymore, because I don't need to know every 2 minutes what rod, reel, lure, boat you know, you don't,
Stuff.
yeah. So,
Good stuff. I do watch Rob Fordyce's show.
do you?
I do.
Now, this is one we've also discussed before, but it came up again. Any plans to maybe re-release Walker's Cay? Have you been
I
able
would love to do that. Sadly, and for years, I've tried to get those shows released from ESPN's vaults, and I've spoken with, I think, everyone at ESPN and beyond to try to make that happen, but evidently it's never going to happen. I mean, I've tried for years. I've tried all sorts of different things. I've tried to buy them. I've tried to lease them. I've tried to go in partnership with ESPN to re-release them and do wraparounds to sort of modernize the opening, and I tried a format where we would take portions of the shows that featured the people that I did shows with at this point 30 years ago, and redo things with those same people now 30 years later, which I thought might be of interest, but I have not been able to sell any notion at all of using or reusing the Walker's shows. It's been sad. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, maybe we can get some fan pressure on them. We got like 10 or 12,000 people on a Facebook page.
Let's
so,
go.
you know,
Yeah.
hit up ESPN. All right. Speaking of your relationships, there was a question about, and I know you had a very close personal relationship with Jose Wejebe. One of the fans that was on here wanted to hear about when he came to you for his first boat loan, and how that whole process kind of went together.
Well, he decided that he wanted to become a guide. He was young. I can't remember exactly what his age was at the time, but he was very young. He had no credit history whatsoever, good or bad. He had never had a loan of any kind in his life. I was working at a bank at the time, lending money, and Jose asked me if there was any chance that he could get a loan. He needed a truck, he needed a boat, and he needed a credit card. And so our bank was a master charge bank. And so I got Jose a master charge card, a boat loan, and a loan for a truck. You could never do that today as a lending officer. Back then, lending officers had a lot more latitude than they have today, not as many rules. As long as your loans didn't go bad, you were still a loan officer. Today, if you break any of the rules, regardless of whether the loan is a good loan or a bad loan. But back then, banks had faith in the lending officers. So I was able to do that for Jose. And I made him several other loans along the way. Never missed a payment, never missed a day, was never late. I mean, it was a good loan because he was a good person and he was responsible. So I don't think he could have gone anywhere else and gotten those loans. But
It pays to have that personal relationship with certain people in the
yes,
world.
it does.
What made him want to become a guide? Did he ever say?
He was from the time he could breathe. He was an angler, and I just think it was Jose's native abilities to teach and to engage people. Jose had this amazing ability, and this was after he had been a guide, but this was part of what made him such a good teacher. But he had this ability to look at you or to peer into the lens of a camera and make you think he was talking to you. I mean, there are fabulous actors who don't possess that ability to just peer into the camera and say, come here, look at this hook, the way this hook is bent. No, come a little bit closer over here. I mean, Jose could do that, whether he was teaching you or talking to a camera. So Jose was more than a guide, he was a teacher. And he enjoyed that part of guiding, which I think all good guides do. I think the guides that are mediocre guides don't care about teaching. But I think that's one of the things that determines the true value of a guide is his ability to infect you with the outdoors and to teach you how to exist there. And Jose had those qualities.
Okay. On the topic of Jose, unfortunately, he had that very untimely death. Lefty passed away not long ago. Doesn't seem like long ago anyway. If you could fish Jose and Lefty, same boat, same day, one more time, where would it be and why?
Do I have to pull?
I'll poll you. I'll poll all three of you.
Well, I don't even have to think about this one. It would be one of two different places. Both places where I fished a lot with both Lefty and Jose, and places that they loved dearly and that I loved dearly. Biscayne Bay in the 60s was a monstrosity. I mean, bonefish, redfish, bluefish, mackerel, permit, tarpon, trout, it just, snapper. There were all these little wrecks around Biscayne Bay where you could find lobsters, and I mean, but the tailing bonefish on the west shore of Biscayne Bay and on the outside of the islands that formed Biscayne Bay, it was better than the Bahamas, it was better than Central America, it was better than Los Roques, it was better than anything out there. And so I would say if we could get in a boat and look at all those bonefish tails again, that would be one of the places. And the other place would be the Everglades. They both loved the Everglades so much, and so did I. And just a very quick story about Lefty. The very first time I took Lefty to Flamingo, I didn't really know Lefty then, but I knew who he was. He was there managing the Met tournament in Miami, and so I took him for his very first time in the Everglades. We went to Flamingo. We ran into snake bite about a mid-falling tide, and I had a little tin boat, and we ran way back up into snake bite, and there was a 20 or 30 flamingos there. and they were walking across the flat, and I saw them at a distance, and I began poling lefty toward these flamingos, and I knew what was going on. They would walk in water about this deep, and they would seine with their bills back and forth like this for crustaceans. And that's 60 pair of legs walking through the water, and schools of redfish would get in amongst those flamingos, and they'd be tailing and running all around in between these flamingos trying to get the shrimp and things that the flamingos were scaring up out of the bottom. And as we got closer to them, you could see all these redfish tails in among the flamingos. And I said, as we got closer, I said to Lefty, Lefty, this would be a good time to get your fly rod out. And he plunged down into the bottom of the boat, opened up a camera case, took out a 400 millimeter lens that he had borrowed from Nikon, put it on a Nikkor matte body and a gun stock. And he laid down on the front of my boat, put a boat cushion underneath the lens, and started taking black and white photographs of these redfish in among the legs of the flamingos. It was a life lesson to me about priorities. Anybody else might have picked up a fly rod and said, I'm going to try to catch every one of those redfish. Lefty wasn't interested in that at all. He got his camera out and he wanted to preserve that image, which he did. And I had some of the most wonderful black and white photographs of that, which I lost in Hurricane Andrew. But so that would be an answer to your question. Those two places, those two people. Yeah, I'd love to go there.
I don't blame you. Those are two I never got to fish with.
Well, I like the idea, especially that you'll be polling.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, so. All right. Did you ever fish with Ted Williams or Jack Nicklaus? I'm not sure why those two specific people.
Yeah,
but,
no. You know what? I never did fish with Jack Nicklaus, but it's not over yet.
It's not.
You could still do that.
Both still
You
around.
could still do that.
And both still fishing.
Ted Williams, I fished with a bunch.
Yeah.
And I've got some great old photographs of that. I also played tennis a lot with him. He had a tennis court at his house in Alamorada.
No, I did not know. In all these years of knowing you, I did not know you played tennis.
Oh yeah, no, I was very serious at one time. And I could beat Ted Williams at tennis. Yeah, I had so much enjoyment from time spent with him. I've heard so many stories about how unpleasant he was and how hard to get along with and difficult. I never saw that at all. I never saw anybody that loved to fish any more than he did. And I mean, he was a casting machine. He'd pull the flat and he would line cast for as long as you were on the flat, all day long. He'd cast and cast and cast. Spinning rod, plug rod, fly rod, he could use it all. He was a very talented angler, great outdoorsman, great shotgun pointer also. Really good guy from my experience.
All right. One other they were curious, because there's always at least one parrot head in a group of 10,000 people.
No,
Never got to fish with Jimmy Buffett.
no.
Because I know he was originally supposed to be on Buccaneers and Bones at some point in time when you were doing it, but we talked about that. I'm not going to get into that here, but
Yeah, I never did. I was a fan, but never got to do that. Buccaneers and Bones. I'll give you a quick story about that. I was in the Bahamas with a group of fly fishermen. We had 4 guys, and we were fishing for in the springtime. This group of small marlin had come around Abaco in the spring, along with very big dolphin. And so we had a game boat down there. One of the guys from the Keys brought a game boat down there every year, and we would rent homes from the residents of Cherokee Sound and keep our people in those homes. And some of the ladies in the village would cook, and we'd go offshore every day to tease billfish and dolphin and tuna. And one day the boat had to take on diesel, so we weren't going to fish that day, and we were on a little beach there at Cherokee Sound, and I was giving casting lessons to some of the clients. And while I was giving the lessons, a big van with dark windows pulled up right close to where we were standing and where I was giving these lessons with the motor just running. And I was trying to concentrate on teaching these people, but the van was right there on top of me. I mean, it was distracting. And the motor was running, we couldn't see inside, I had no idea who it was, but they were just right there. Bothered me, you know, and I kept looking over at the van, and I, started to go over a couple of times, and went on for about 10 minutes, and all of a sudden, the sliding doors of the van open, and the front doors of the van open, and people start piling out of this van like one of these clown cars with all these people inside of it. And I looked again, and then I saw the first one out was Lefty. And then Val Atkinson's got out, and then Tom Brokaw got out, and then Michael Keaton got out, and then these guys were all down there filming Buccaneers and Bones, and I guess they had time off from filming, and they were just driving around the island, and he saw me there giving casting lessons, and they all started getting out of the van. There were other people there too. I'm trying to think who else. Oh, Oliver White was there. Oliver was just opening up his lodge. It was just one of those moments. I mean, all these people from all over the world just happened to be on this little beach at Cherokee Sound all at the same time, and they come piling out of this van that was bothering me.
And I've seen that bothered look on your face, so I know the look.
The look.
The look.
The look.
All right. You talked earlier, you made a comment about Jose being a complete angler. And that was actually one of the questions. Now, I consider you a complete angler. You know, there's very few people that can use spinning gear, bait casting gear, fly gear, offshore gear, all together. When you say somebody's a complete angler, what does that entail to you?
Well, I think it's the things that you mentioned. But when I say it includes a little bit more than that. It's not just using the tackle, but it has to do with a complete understanding not only of the tackle and the use of the tackle, but understanding the resource as well. I mean, Jose was at home in the Everglades. You'd find him bass fishing. You'd find him bone fishing, tarpon fishing, and Jose was very skilled at offshore fishing as well. I mean, he could set the numbers in his plotter, and next thing you knew, you were in the dry tortugas having a great day with Jose and his big offshore boat. So, I mean, he had a complete understanding of the entire natural world, wet world, and could use all the tackle that was involved in exploring that entire world, no matter what it was. Jose was there. Lefty was that way too. Lefty could do it all. And, although I know many, many great anglers, I don't know that many complete anglers.
I'll agree with you on that one. And for those, because I got it pointed right at Flip right now, we're talking about his buddy Rick Earl.
Rick falls into that category for sure.
And maybe one of the fishiest guys. Don't take it the wrong way, Flip, but to date, I don't think I've had Rick on the boat where we haven't just wound up having a banner day, even on a tough day, you know. So yeah, I'll agree with you on that. There's certain we've always said there's certain people that are just fishy, and he's definitely one of them. Favorite place to fish now?
I love the Bahamas. I love bone fishing in the Bahamas. I mean, right now today, you know, the resource is still pretty good there. It's not what it was, but still pretty good. There's still some really nice destinations there, and the bonefish still tail. I mean, I'd have to say the Bahamas.
Okay. Pretty easy. Any destinations you haven't made it to that you want to?
You know, it's if the Seychelles weren't so far away, if they could find some sort of way to drug me and I could just wake up and be there, I think I'd like to fish the Seychelles, or that part of the world anyway. Although I've fished the Pacific a little bit, been fortunate. But the Seychelles has eluded me.
It is a long, long trip.
That's a long trip.
And after your trip to Australia, you probably don't ever want to take that again.
New Zealand was...
Yes, yeah, New Zealand, that's right. All right. Tackle-related questions. We'll kind of get to the nitty-gritty here. How many flies do you take on your average daily trip?
You know, I have usually a small box of flies that I have tremendous confidence in. For the most part, they're flies that I tie myself, and I don't consider myself a good fly tire. But I enjoy it. It's therapeutic for me, and I have these little patterns that I have great confidence in. Usually the guide cringes when I open my box and goes, "Flip, why don't you use one of my flies?" Which I end up doing quite often. But I always have my little box of a couple of dozen flies that horrify most people.
Yeah, you're not a person that gets on a skiff with 3 or 4 bags or boxes or
No, I
know.
do like a peanut butter sandwich though.
Yeah. So I mean, that is one of the things I can always say is usually the only time the boat gets real crowded when I'm with you is when we're tagging along with video equipment.
Yeah.
You know. But how do you sort your flies? Do you do it by species, locations, types of flies? Do they all just go in together and you don't sort them?
No. I think the first thing I think of is water depth. You know, I mean, I usually know at the beginning of the day what the species are going to be. And then I think my first consideration is always water depth. Because we are always making choices based on whether a fly sinks or works in the surface of the water column. So I think that's where I launch anyway. Yeah, I would go with water depth.
Okay. Now, what makes you choose a particular fly? I know there's certain elements of a fly you love. What are those elements?
I love flies that cast well. I know it's crazy, but I hate the way crab flies cast. And all the noise that they make when they're flying through the air.
That I can attest, you've actually refused to fish them before.
No, I know. I just I reject the concept that certain fish only eat crabs. It's never been my view of things, but I love casting things like clouser minnows and streamers, deceivers, things that are somewhat aerodynamic when you cast them. I love casting weighted flies because they cast so far, so easily. So the crabs.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Rick's here, so I can say this, and we can both laugh about it. There was a day you were on the skiff and we were out chasing redfish, and you had thrown at several, and they just weren't eaten. And I tried for at least an hour to get you to go to a crab fly because I knew that's what they were eating. For whatever reason, that's what they were keyed in on. And finally, you switched positions with me, and we had an overslot redfish laying at the surface. And I had one of those ugly crab flies you hate, and you're like, he's never going to eat it. And I dropped it in front of that fish, and as soon as it gets in front of him, he slams it and takes off. And
so what is your point? What is your
I remember this conversation because I looked at you and I said, did your clients flip when they were guiding, when you were guiding? Did they ever just refuse to listen to you?
Frequently.
And I shared that story with Rick on the boat one day, and he just chuckled because he knew.
But it was a crab.
And your exact words to me were, it reminded me of that scene in Quigley Down Under at the very end. It was, I know they work, I just don't like them.
That was a great scene.
Yeah. When it comes to flies, do you have more saltwater flies or freshwater flies?
I'm probably equaled out there.
Yeah.
I do an awful lot of bass fishing, and I do an awful lot of trout fishing out west. So I have a lot of sweetwater flies. I can't tie them. They're too intricate and delicate, but so I might, in volume, I might have more saltwater ones just because I tie so many.
Right. Okay. Now this is one I already know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever used a direct drive bait caster?
Yeah. I think the first reel that I ever had was a direct drive. We call them plug reels, or bait casters. We call them plug reels. And then all of my life up until, I'm going to say, the early, middle 60s, when they came out with reels that were not direct drive, that actually had adjustable drags and anti-reverses. Prior to that, there was no such thing. The reels were direct drive. They had no drag systems whatsoever. There was a Cuban woman in the southwest section of Miami who knitted what we called thumb stalls, which were a little doily that fit over your thumb. Actually, it fit over your left thumb. So you would cast the reel. You would switch hands because it was a right-handed retrieve. You would cast, switch hands, and you would jig or work a plug. And when a fish struck, you would set the hook with your left hand and with your left thumb on the spool of the plug reel. And you had this little doily that was made out of what seemed to be kite string. And so a lot of air got in, but you would keep your thumb on the spool and create drag by pressing on the spool. The line was either linen line or Dacron line. And if you touched it with your thumb and you did not have that thumb stall on there, you had a blister and short over. or it would wear your fingerprints off your thumb. So we all had in our tackle boxes, we had several of these thumb saws because if you lost one or one got wet, they worked better when they were dry. So direct drive, I guess the first bonefish, the first tarpon, I mean the first amberjack, the first cobia, first grouper that I mean all these fish, we caught them on direct drive plug reels.
Wow.
No drag whatsoever. And then the first drag that ever came along, the Pfluger Reel Company came with what they called a cub drag. I don't know if you remember a cub drag. It was just a handle that screwed onto your reel, and the handle had in the center of it, it had a pressure plate or a sandwich plate that had like 15 little screws around the outside of it, and with a real small screwdriver you would adjust these little screws, each one of them, to create more drag. And it was preset. You couldn't adjust it while and the handle still spun backwards. But when you held onto it, the spindle would slip inside this sandwich of. It was ridiculous. It's called a Pfluger Cub Drag. And when that thing came out, everybody was, oh my God, this is so fabulous. And then the Ambassador reels came along that had free spools and adjustable drags and everything else. And then we started really catching fish, and monofilament came out.
Now what are you using?
I'm real fond of this Bates reel that's made over in Texas. It is like a fine watch for casting, and it has the most amazing drag. It's got several different adjustments on the spool, several on the drag. I mean, it's a real fine plug reel.
I've gotten to use it a couple of times out with you, and they are very.
Oh, it's a new world. It's another deal. Yeah.
Very well made and kind of
Yeah.
above everybody else.
Well, it's a small group of guys out there that are just concerned with excellence, and they found it.
All right. Couple of more. Favorite tarpon fly?
Well, it depends. You know, I'd say that there is no single favorite. It just depends on the size of the fish, where you're fishing for them. Flies in general for tarpon, I would say, have gotten smaller and smaller through the years. But if I had to pick one tarpon fly, I think it would be some variation of the worm, the Pallot worm.
Okay. What do you consider light tackle angling? That's always a term that gets thrown around.
That's such a difficult question now. And it used to be really easy to answer that question, but then along came braid. And so now someone fishes with 6-pound braid, and they consider themselves a light tackle angler, and that braid breaks at 12 or 15-pound test. Why they call it 6-pound braid or 30-pound braid, which is what most bass fishermen, 20 or 30-pound braid, bass fishermen use that, breaks at 40 or 50-pound test. Growing up, people fished monofilament, which broke at or very close to certain pound test ranges. We fished on plug rods, we fished 12 or later 15-pound test, and the line broke at 12 or 15-pound test. When we started fishing spin, when it just came from Europe, in the Met tournament, in the spinning division, you were allowed to use line that broke at 8-pound test. So we fished everything that we fished with spinning rods, we used 8-pound test, because if we entered a fish in the tournament and the line didn't break at 8-pound test, they threw the catch out. So we fished for sailfish, wahoo, barracudas, tuna, grouper, snapper, bonefish, permit, tarpon, everything with 8-pound test. And 100-pound tarpon, big tuna, big giant black groupers that, at that time I think on 8-pound test they were able to catch black groupers that were near 50 pounds on 8-pound. I mean, those were real light tackle catches. Today, it's a different story. I mean, nobody seems to be concerned with light tackle. They use light tackle gear, but the lines are not light tackle at all. They're not even nearly light tackle. When we were kids, one of our greatest joys was to fish 2-pound test spin. They actually had 2-pound test monofilament, and we fished 2-pound test for everything. I mean, pompano, snapper. I mean, we went nuts with 2-pound tests. We had these little Italian reels called Alcedo microns with 2-pound test, and fishing true 2-pound test prepares you to understand the true breaking strength of line and how much pressure you can put on fish, whether you're fishing 2-pound, 12-pound, 20-pound, no matter what it is. When you have a feel for what 2-pound will break at, you can begin understanding increments on their way up to almost any breaking strength. But I think that 2-pound test fishing when we were kids prepared us for a lot of stuff.
What do you consider the top innovation in the fishing world over the last, say, 30 to 40 years?
Outboards that would get you home. and the discontinuing the use of shear pins.
I can laugh at that because my first motor ever was a 1970s Johnson that still had shear pins, and every time you stopped on a flat and went to crank it up, you did your little Hail Mary to make sure it was still going to fire up.
No, the rubber hub in props and outboards that would actually start and get you home were the two greatest innovations ever.
All right. One last question, and this has to do with shark fishing. Particularly backwater shark fishing for small sharks. Tackle recommendations for it?
Well, I'm a fly fisher, so I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy the chumming process for sharks, drifting and chumming and having them come up that scent line all lit up and casting a fly to them. Their strike is remarkable. When they take a fly, it's an event. And then depending on the species of shark, some of it can be really, really, really spectacular. I mean, blacktip spinner sharks, that's incredible. Mako sharks, another whole, of course that's not backcountry. You did say backcountry, right?
Yeah, that's what they asked.
But spinners in the backcountry are fairly common, or bull sharks. That sort of stuff's very exciting. I love shark fishing, I really do.
Well, and you'll like this because I had Kim out last weekend or last day of spring break, and in some of our favorite areas to fish redfish and snook, we had 15 sharks throughout the day in various locations.
It's getting crazy, isn't it?
Anywhere from, a foot and a half to maybe 3 feet. And it's one of those things that if they come along, I'm throwing at them.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's
But
just,
isn't it amazing how many more sharks are on there?
it is. And I know you haven't been out with me because it's been hunting season. And for those people that don't know, getting flip out fishing during hunting season is
I
next to
haven't.
impossible.
No.
Even though the water's crystal clear, conditions are perfect. But I think when I get you out here very soon with Rick and I, you're going to be amazed at the recovery that's going on out here in some areas. Not everywhere, but we have areas where grass has really started coming back. The water quality is getting better.
Why do you think that is? Why is the water quality getting better?
I personally think we've put enough pressure. We're not done yet by a long stretch of the imagination. But I think we've put enough pressure on our local governments and our state government. You know, we have a love him or hate him, and I know that's the only two options it seems in this political world. I think Ron DeSantis has been a godsend for our waterways. He's put forth the money we've needed and kept it there, and done more than just mouth service like so many of our governors beforehand. We have a lot of restoration projects that have been put in place to keep a lot of the runoff out of the river directly. So I think we've made progress in the right direction. Again, I'll say it, there's still a long way to go.
Well, I think we should have this conversation again in August
Yeah,
and see what the warm weather and the warm water and the rainfall does to the algae situation, and if all these things are still looking good after hurricane season, then I think I might agree with you.
right.
But I think we have, challenges that are bigger than some of the things that you mentioned that we have not made any strides with, that are, at the point of the spear. And I think we just need to see, unfortunately, the real solutions are going to be painful and costly.
Yes.
And whether or not the people are willing to withstand the pain and the expense of fixing it remains to be seen. I think the biggest tool that we have in making that happen right now is awareness. I'm disturbed by the Captains for Clean Water survey that they did last year. Revealed that 15% of Floridians were aware that there were even water problems in the state at any level. So the solutions are going to be in large measure political. Very few politicians are going to get behind a 15% constituency. So awareness, I think, is, to grow that percentage of the constituency that would get behind any politician. We're going to have to do a better job of making the public understand what's at stake.
Well, and I think we are, whether it's through Captains for Clean Water, the local Waterman Alliance here. We're getting some people in positions that are raising noise,
That's
creating
good.
the noise,
Well, that's good.
which I think is different. And while it may only be 15% at one point in time, that's a noisy 15%,
Hopefully.
which you have to be.
Hopefully.
You
But,
know,
but typically anglers and outdoorsmen are not noisy.
well,
They're the people who sort of sit back, stoically aware of what the problems are, but sadly, I don't think they've proven themselves to be a group of people that get tremendously active. I mean, they have behind certain. I mean, you look at game fish status for redfish. That's one of the great big accomplishments that I think we have.
Well, now catch and release in our location.
Well, I think we're off to a good start there in the lagoon anyway with redfish, but I think they need to do trout. They drastically need to do trout, and so that we can have those great trout that we used to have in the Mosquito Lagoon system or the Indian River Lagoon system. As long as they're killed and taken out of a closed system like that, we're never going to return to that fishery, and we have more and more anglers all the time. So that's more and more dead fish all the time. We have more and more tourists fishing during the winter than ever, for which I thank the governor, who's promoted tourism and new residents. So
it is a double-edged sword.
Sure.
It really is. I mean, as a fishing guide, and you did it, Rick did it. You want the tourist here for business, but at the same time, it's that double-edged sword of to have the tourist, you got to have the buildings for them, the homes, the hotels, the condos, whatever it is.
Golf courses, and the water usage, and
yeah. So we got to find that fine line between it all. You were talking about summer. I will say one of the areas I was most pleasantly surprised with is the area we call the clinkers. Along the lagoon there. And before last hurricane season, I was in there and we were seeing these little sprigs of widgeon grass return. Then we had really high water with the storms. We had a lot of runoff from the hurricanes that came through last year. And I, for one, it took so long for that water to go back down. I didn't think the grass was going to survive. I thought for sure it was done. That's one of the areas where the grass, I'm not going to say it's back to what it was in the 80s by any stretch of the imagination, but it's pretty close to what it was before our massive die-offs in the early 2000s.
Just in the clinkers, or
no? But that's one of the areas that I can say survived last year, and it's tall, thick, healthy seagrass. And there's other areas throughout. It is kind of weird. You'll have an area of really beautiful seagrass, and you'll go around the point, and it's barren. It's like it hasn't gotten back there yet.
I wonder why the clinkers is
I don't know.
going back like that.
I don't know. And there's a couple of other areas, that it's that way that I can't wait to show you, because for me it's exciting. And again, I won't say it's perfect. I'm the first one to admit, I tell everybody, I email the governor at least 3 times a week about the herbicide spraying that every city, county, and all these state and federal officials do, urging them to stop it. If there was one message to give all your fans out there on the water quality issues we're facing, what would it be?
It would be herbicides. I mean, it would be the constant and complete daily spraying of invasive aquatic vegetation that goes on everywhere in the state of Florida. All those chemicals. I mean, there's a ton of argument about whether or not these chemicals are harmful to us. I sincerely believe that they are. Others believe that they're not, for whatever reason. But what I think science has clearly shown is that whether they're harmful to us as chemicals or not, they kill all aquatic vegetation, not just invasive. All aquatic vegetation is killed by these herbicides. When those plants are killed, they decompose and they go into solution wherever they're killed. They impact the clarity of the water, and so they impact photosynthesis. They give rise to algal blooms. They form silt on the bottom wherever they're used, and sludge, toxic sludge. And so forget about the argument about whether or not they're good for us or bad for us or cause cancer or don't. They destroy our waterways. They do get rid of the invasive aquatic vegetation. But at this point, I think we need that invasive vegetation because that's all there is. So the spraying, every single water course in the state of Florida is being sprayed with chemicals. Debatable the effects of those chemicals on us, but I don't take the word of Monsanto for any of it. They still are saying you can drink it and it's harmless and it has a half-life of 2 minutes or 6 days or something like that. Well, I don't believe that. I've seen anecdotally that that's not true, but I wouldn't even get into that argument. The net result is it's harmful to our waterways in the final analysis. All that vegetation that used to bind the marl together and keep it from going into solution every time there's a boat wake or the wind blows, we need the root systems of aquatic vegetation, and we need that vegetation to provide oxygen in the water, and we need it as refuge for the larval stages of fish and shrimp and crustaceans. And I mean, it's all gone now, all gone now. And a lot of that winds up in the Indian River lagoon system, and I think is responsible more than anything else for the fact that we don't have grass there. So if I had a message for anyone listening, we need to stop applying chemicals to what's ultimately our drinking water.
It's a great message.